So coffee with the editor this morning is with Dr. Fred Amonya. He has 20 years of experience in infrastructure policy and investment management. His experience covers both research and practice. On the latter, he has advised governments and multilateral development banks, investment banks, and lenders to infrastructure concessions, as well as infrastructure asset managers from around the world. He is a chartered engineer and holds a PhD in policy science. At present, his attention is on molding scholarships on PPPs, and particularly across the universities of Africa. Today, the good doctor and I are going to be talking about the impacts and challenges of the fourth industrial revolution, with specific focus on transport and in particular, rail.
So my first thing to you is that the fourth industrial revolution has become somewhat of a buzzword in the industry. Every conference and seminar has grabbed this as a topic.
Yes.
But how will this really impact rail and the development of rail on the African continent?
You've opened it very well. It's a buzzword. And when these words become ubiquitous, we lose a lot. Now, we should first make it clear that this thing called the fourth industrial revolution is such a jolt that we need to take it seriously. But what is it? It's not just blockchain. It's not just distributed ledger technology. The fourth industrial revolution is a jolt that includes two things. First is a social component, and then the technological component. So it's a social and technological wave. And that takes us back. Let's just reflect on how we got here. And it might be good to start with computerization, which many will accept was the third industrial revolution. We can go back to iron and the first, second industrial revolution. But let's start with the third industrial revolution and see how we got where we are now. So from computerization, all of a sudden, with computerization, you could sit on your machine and move some material from the paper to the byte. With the fourth industrial revolution, essentially, you're having machines connected to humans and humans connected to humans. That's the bit that is lost. Human beings to human beings better, right? And that's the sociology. Now, that ultimately is actually more important than the technological aspect. So, let's come back to rail. Rail, our subject. Let's think about how things are done today. If you wanted to send me a container here, and then I wanted to have that sent, say, to New York, how would it work? You do some work there and send information to me, and then I would have to relay that information to the person in New York, right? On the other hand, what you do might be known to us all. And just that is where the value lies, in that with distributed ledger technology, action is available to everybody. And then control what you don't want other people to know. Just pause a moment and see how powerful that is. Just the fact that what you do can be available to everybody, you can have control over that. That means all of a sudden, rail in Africa has had challenges. Of late, you might know that in some countries, statutory instruments have been used to compel containers from the road to the rail. I'm sure you know that. Right? But here's the good news. That movement from the road to the container should be done by this thing called distributed ledger technology, DLT. DLT is going to sort out rail, and that's going to be our take. DLT is going to sort out rail in that instead of compelling, why is it that a trucker somewhere in a trader somewhere in Kampala or in Harare will want to use trucks instead of putting the container on rail? Why? Why? Probably there are so many reasons, but the bigger one and the deeper one is this. A trader in Kampala will know that with his or her truck, she has control. But then if we import this thing called DLT, distributed ledger technology, it means that the person actually has control without using her trucks. Just think about it. You've got control without using your trucks. So ultimately, DLT is going to sort out rail. That's the point. And we don't need to have ministers struggling with legislation or invoking regulations, forcing containers to rail. That is not the future. That is one aspect of it. There is another.
Yes.
Let's come to our urban places, the cities of Africa. I'll make a bet. The next decade is going to be one for light rail. Now, if we've looked at, you've traveled Africa and you see our mess. That is a big, big bet. But I can afford to make that because this jolt, this sociological and technological jolt called the Fourth Industrial Revolution, is going to force governments to look at light rail. It's something that the young people demand space, and they demand that space be available,
yes,
available to everybody. And that's the important thing. They want to share space, and they see no reason as to why, the next generation sees no reason as to why they cannot have that space available to everybody. Now, what has happened is that the state and agency of the state has tended to place inertia on change. And that's a difficult, that's a strong statement to make, but it's one that we must make. So all the state has to do is simply withdraw obstacles to this wave called the Fourth Industrial Revolution. And then we should see light rail emerge strongly on a continent.
Well, just trying to get from the airports in Kenya to a hotel, traveling 7 kilometers an hour.
Yes.
The congestion is incredible, and the only way to deal with that is the railway.
Yes, if you're trying to move from JKIA, Jomo Kenyatta International Airport, to the city center of Nairobi on a weekday, if your plane lands at 9 a.m.,
yeah,
you're in trouble. You're really in trouble. There's no reason. Why must we punish ourselves? Why?
So how would you put the Fourth Industrial Revolution in line with like light rail? Is that just from not just from how it's built, but how people engage with it, how the signaling works, how the train control system works, the number of trains, the headway? Is that all part of your basket of elements for the Fourth Industrial Revolution?
The design is not a challenge. Good question. The design is not a challenge. The challenge is to move the obstacles of policy. The basic design that uses this thing called DLT, distributed ledger technology, where the entire logistics of light rail would be more efficiently managed on this platform called DLT. That is not a challenge at all. I know there's so many conferences across Africa, across the world on asset management with the fourth industrial revolution. The challenge, but that's not that's not the main challenge. The challenge is moving obstacles of policy. And the only way to move obstacles of policy is for the masses to say, no, enough is enough. We cannot bear this. And there's a strong wave coming. There is a tsunami coming called the fourth industrial revolution. We are seeing a few places change. If you were in Dar es Salaam when 6 years ago, and you went there today, it's a different place. Now, why is it a different place? I want to argue that it's not because of policy action. It's more because of policy withdrawal.
Okay.
Yes. It's not a positive action. It's more coming to say, you know what, we must not be an obstacle to change. Right? So you sit back in contrast to trying to move obstacles. That's a very different way of looking at what's going on. So I think policy needs to withdraw, to remove obstacles from that space. Yes.
So that was going to be my next question. So, you know, it's one thing to say how governments in Africa are preparing for this next shift. I want to ask, is Africa really ready for this next shift?
Must Africa be ready? Who in Africa?
Well, it's a case of what infrastructure in Africa is missing and where in order for us to really take advantage of this. So let's take the telephone line, for example, because this has been, you know, used before. We've gone from like most countries in Africa not even having that like fixed tring hello device. They went straight to mobile technology. Okay. And that in itself is like the fourth industrial revolution. That brings the Internet of Things, really connects the humans to the humans, as part of your statement earlier. What else needs to happen in order to facilitate this for the continent?
But you've said it all. Okay. What else do you want me to say? I mean, look, ask a graduate today, living Cape Town or living Nairobi or Makerere or Kumasi. Ask that graduate whether he or she has seen a telephone line. The answer is likely to be no.
Yeah.
But then go back a few years. We had those lines. So what has happened? That is why the people who run the state in Africa should really be careful about this thing. This is a tsunami. This is a strong wave that is coming, and it's coming very quickly. So back to your question on being ready. They don't have to be ready. This thing will just come, and ultimately this thing will just come and sweep the space. The only thing.
What are the risks? What are the risks?
Yes. That's a good question. The only thing is that when it comes and you're not ready, there are two things. You can either surf it, or it can destroy you. So there are risks. And what is going to happen if the masses say, you know what, we cannot bear our space of transport. We cannot bear our space of transport, and the government is not ready. So that leads us to what the governments of Africa are doing today to prepare for the fourth industrial revolution. Now, we need to look at the fourth industrial revolution has got a sister, and the sister is public-private partnerships. I would argue that 4IR is the elder sister. It's the stronger. But then those two jewels, the fourth industrial revolution and public-private partnerships, are so powerful that they should be held in the presidency. Prime ministers and presidents of Africa should be leading, should be managing those two nodes. They can delegate anything else, but not the two. But what do we see? You go across Africa, where do you find public-private partnerships? Probably the Minister of Finance, and sometimes they'll call it the Minister of Finance and Economic Development. How much economic development do they do? They cannot do a lot because the focus is on the budget. How are we going to distribute the pie? The focus is short-term, thinking is short-term, and at best medium term. So how do you place such a jolt like public-private partnership, PPP, under Minister of Finance? It's wrong. It is wrong. I run across that continent, our continent, across it. And each time I move and advising on public-private partnerships, each time I go to Minister of Finance, and you can see it's difficult. They don't have structures for the long-term thinking required in respect to public-private partnerships. And we should say the same of the fourth industrial revolution. So the fourth industrial revolution today is under Ministry of ICT, because fourth industrial revolution is looked at as blockchain. This is wrong.
Yeah.
Until we get to understand what the jolt is, we'll be in trouble. So if there's any take from this, really, we have to go back and think deeper. We've got to dig deeper. We must not waste the two concepts. Public-private partnership, PPP, has been reduced to a procurement tool. Wait a moment. It's not a procurement tool. Next time we can talk about public-private partnership, its genesis, and just how important it is. This is something that should be under the presidency. And the same applies to the fourth industrial revolution, because it's not blockchain, it's not DLT, distributed ledger technology, it's more than that. This is a sociological and technological jolt that the president should be handling. But you ask them, why? Why not? Why is it they're not doing it? Something else comes up. If you're going to sit and think about a country, the long term, the very long term future of a country, think about the country over decades. You must be prepared. You must be stable enough to do that. But what keeps our leaders busy? What keeps the president or the prime minister in Africa busy? It is, will I win the next election? Now, if you're thinking about winning the next election and your concerns on winning the next election, then the subject and people around you will be tuned to that. And if you're going to have the people around you tuned to winning the next election, then you cannot focus on the bigger jolt. Now, Philippa, you might ask me, so what is the solution? That's a difficult one. I have no answer. Maybe it's serendipity.
Well, before I get to asking you what the solution is, I want to know how many actors, and I say actors because, you know, we all play a role in this, from industry are required to ensure that Africa can capitalize on the financial gains of the fourth industrial revolution. And, you know, is this universities and policymakers, research development from the private sector? And should there be a thinking around setting up a dedicated African cluster that maybe reports to the presidents of each country that focuses on achieving the financial gain of what the fourth industrial revolution should bring for us as a continent?
NEPAD is not far from where you're seated.
Yes.
NEPAD is not far from where you're seated. You're right. This thing needs a concerted effort. NEPAD should be helping the state across Africa, the countries of Africa, lead PPP. Probably NEPAD is not doing that because PPP hasn't been conceived as it should.
So what are your thoughts on the PPP? I know we're digressing, but PPPs are a thing, and you've just mentioned that it's seen as a procurement tool. It's a bit more than that because it's an enabler of significant proportion. Yes,
and every time we mention PPP, know that the elder sisters are around, the fourth industrial revolution. So they two move together. They are very close. sometimes when we're talking about PPP bringing the fourth industrial revolution, so if Africa is going to, Africa will need the support. Countries of Africa will need the support of each other. And the best entity at the moment seems to be Nepal as it evolves.
Yes.
Into a new entity, right?
The part of the African Union, and yeah.
Yes, into now as they evolve into a new entity, they need to understand, to appreciate better those two jewels, 4IR and PPP. If NEPA did, then it would be easy for them to give support to the countries of Africa. And when you wake up one morning and all of a sudden you find 4IR and PPP not under ICT and Minister of Finance, but under the presidency, then you know that some good things are happening. Now it's not all doom and gloom. Just look next door. The government of South Africa did, first of all, they took over the presidency, took up 4IR, correct? And how did they do it? They reached out to the masses.
Yeah.
There was this ad saying, oh, you know what? Can you nominate somebody to the commission? That was clever. That was clever. And that gives a lot of promise to Africa. So if South Africa can inspire the rest of the continent, I think we'll make progress. Okay. And progress we must. We cannot afford to stay where we are now. Yes?
No, we can't. Okay, so in your opinion, right, what do you see as the main challenges? And what are the items that can be easily resolved? So what are the quick wins here against some of those challenges? Quick wins.
The main challenges to what?
To the implementation and really, taking advantage of the fourth industrial revolution. 4IR.
Understanding.
Okay.
Thinking. Knowing. You talked of universities.
Yes.
They should do better. If they did better, would the agents of the state listen? Can we have our universities talk, commune with the president? This is what happened. This is what happened in this 17th, 18th century. Who was dining with the kings then? The Oilers and Lagrange and others. Okay. So the people who move the calculus that we are using today is data. Behind this whole story of OIR, DLT, distributed ledger technology, and blockchain is mathematics that traces back to 17th and 18th, 18th and 19th, especially the 19th century. So all we are doing is trying to harvest, and sometimes we don't do a very good job. What happened in the past? Now, in order to do better, we need the president and his team talking to local universities. That's what we need.
And schools.
And there's nothing better, ultimately. And you know what? Africa doesn't need foreign money for this. The good news is it's not expensive to pay people to think. It's expensive to pay people to do other things. It's expensive to pay people to steal money. It's very expensive paying people to steal money. It's very expensive to pay people to do some clerical work, administrative work. It's not expensive to pay people to think. Africa does not need money from anywhere to improve her universities and for her universities to take on the bigger challenge. And the good news is this: the resource required is in Africa, because Africans can think as well as anybody else. So why don't we do it? And this is going to be difficult. It's going to be very difficult for this generation to address the next if we don't take advantage of YR. There is no better way for Africa to move away from the margins of humanity, where it is now, and become a full member of humanity in respect to economics. There is no better way than YR. Yes?
Okay, so my next question is, because you've now, we've harped on the university thing, not a bad thing. But you've also brought in the next generation. So one of my favorite topics is talking about the jobs of tomorrow.
Yes.
That stems on how are our current jobs going to change? Will we still have jobs as we traditionally know them over the next 10 years? What is the impact of this kind of technology coming through? Replacing us. So there is fear throughout the continent with regards to protecting one's job, because you don't know if it's going to change in the next 10 years. But my biggest concerns with jobs for the future or tomorrow's jobs is, are we putting enough emphasis in our younger generations, so the grade ones up, before they even get to university? Are they being trained and taught and crafted or molded in a way that they will meet the jobs of tomorrow? Because my opinion is not. It's the same thing happening as it did 30 years ago. And my concern is it's going to set the generation entering school now up for failure. They're not being prepared. What are your thoughts?
Wow.
This is your field of expertise.
Wow, that's that's a big one. You know, it's a big one. I'll ask you a question. Think about the tools of communication. Who supplies, or who has been supplying? It's a bit political at this stage, but who has been supplying the rest of the world? Silicon Valley. Basically, Silicon Valley has been pumping service, I'll use that phrase, across the world. Yeah? If the world wanted to feed itself well, how many countries would it need? Just a handful of countries, right? Mm-hmm. Here's the challenge. Science needs very few actors to provide for the world. So, how then do we distribute welfare? How then do we distribute welfare when not everybody may be needed in the action? Let me say it again. Science needs very few actors to provide for the rest of the world. How then do we distribute welfare without engaging the rest of the world in the action? That's a difficult one. That is a difficult one. How do we attain that? You cannot say science is going to do it. Science could do it. We could have iPads and given to everybody on the planet. Given free to everybody on the planet. And people just sleep, wake up, and do nothing. But that is not sustainable, because a human being would not exercise, would not mobilize his or her full humanity by not getting engaged. And yet, science does not need everybody to provide that aggregate welfare. So what are we going to do? What are we going to do? How do we mobilize? I mean, we take it in a very simplistic way. If you watch television, we talk about jobs in a very simplistic way. Take people to school so that you can have jobs. in the short run, it may be, it is simplistic in that if you take people to school, do a bit of coding, they'll come out, they'll code, and they'll be engaged that way, and society will be happy. But in the long run, the amount of the action required to meet the needs of the world can be concentrated in just a handful of people, and that is a challenge we face. So what will the rest of the rest of humanity do? How do we engage other people in not the production? They may not be involved in the production, probably the service, but there is hope. There is hope in that somehow with this new wave called 4IR, there's a better, stronger appreciation of humanity. So when I look at you, Philpa, I see I take time. I'm concerned more. That is something new. So there is strong appreciation of both humanity and the environment. Are we together? So with that, we could create an entire set of industries built around 4IR, not providing the derivatives of science. By the derivatives of science, I've given an example already, the iPad, etc. Right? Not providing the derivatives of science, but in this case, providing the derivatives of sociology. Let me use that. I think that's a better way of putting it. So that it's more the social space. It's more now the social space where the industries, around which the industries will be built. But it's not that simple. Ultimately, people will say, so we don't want Silicon Valley providing for the entire globe. Cape Town will say, no, we are going to do it. Maybe Nairobi will say, we want to do it. And yet the fact is, one place can do it. Yes. So we might end up spending many, many years fighting each other. Just the struggles. Not increasing aggregate service, but just struggling on who should do what. And yet one place could do it all. See how difficult it is? So it is difficult.
So which country in Africa do you think is streaks ahead?
Well, I've already placed a few praises on South Africa. And look, what the government there did, the approach to developing 4IR is a lesson not just for Africa. Forget Africa. It's a lesson for the world.
Okay.
Should go back to it. Just look at the approach. Going out to the masses and saying, you know what? We've got this jolt called 4IR. So for the fourth industrial revolution, which is under the presidency, want a team that is going to steer it. And what does the government do? Reach out to the people, let the people nominate. Where else has it happened? I don't know. I know quite a bit about the world. I spent the last 4 years looking at 122 countries for the World Road Association, FIAC, looking at transport systems in those countries. So I think I've looked at the world quite closely, but I cannot pick one with such a good example. I cannot. Yes.
Well, that's good to know. So the next time we talk, we're going to talk about PPPs.
Every time we're talking about PPP,
but like specific,
we must bring in the elder sister. You cannot talk about PPP without the fourth industrial revolution.
Okay.
Just like you can't talk seriously about most of the subjects or concerning public space without the fourth industrial revolution. Next time somebody is doing a feasibility study somewhere in Joburg, You get someone doing a feasibility study and throwing out some estimates. The first question you ask that person, wait a moment, what's your take on the fourth industrial revolution? If there is no answer, please spare your time the agony of looking at those figures. Because this thing pervades, is going to cut across society, and it's going to demand deeper thinking from the people who attempt to guide policy, not just in Africa. Africa is most critical because our structures are evolving, and unlike the West where the structures are stable, the spaces of Africa are more dynamical. Now I'm using that word as opposed to more dynamic. I think we shall need the paper somewhere. They're more dynamical than the high income countries where structures exist, structures are stable. Okay. Yes. So the people who are at the moment attempting to advise on public space in Africa, well, they should be serious. We have a lot. We have so many people who are having holiday in Africa. You go to a university in the West, come back with some frames of rational choice, and then you pick your computer and then you throw out a few numbers, claiming those are returns. And so the next time you meet anybody doing a feasibility study, since you're looking at rail very closely, ask the person, oh, wait a moment, what is your take on the fourth industrial revolution? If there is no answer, spare your time.